The perception of artwork can change over a period of time, from being what is most hated to being a cultural phenomenon. This can happen for multiple reasons and within multiple groups. For this project, my question is, how has the perception amongst college-age people of graffiti changed since it first appeared among the trains and bustling city walls of New York City and other such urban areas since the 1980s?
Graffiti vandals can be hard to catch.
It's a huge problem.
All-out war on graffiti.
2 out of every 3 cans were stolen out of your typical neighborhood store.
And what happens to the kids convicted of graffiti offenses?
Crime scene colon, these cold streets you patrol on. Try to get a hold on, kids strapped with growl on.
Before I proceed with how graffiti has changed since the 1980s, I need to first talk about the definition of graffiti. The first important definition of graffiti states that it is markings as initials, slogans, or drawings written, spray painted, or sketched on a sidewalk, wall of a building, or public restroom. The second definition states such markings as a whole or as constituting a particular group. This is a vital distinction to be made in an analysis like this, as there are many forms of graffiti, but I will mainly be focusing on the first definition of these two. For the purposes of this project, while graffiti did not take hold of the country in the 1970s, it was only based mainly in large cities. By the 1980s, however, graffiti had spread around the country and was beginning to become a point of discussion of the new culture that it was taking over. Almost since the beginning, college campuses have been in an area where new ideas and trends take root and become part of the larger culture of the country. With graffiti, this concept is the same. As graffiti started to become more mainstream within the public as the 1980s progressed, many began to notice that some of the graffiti being done in colleges was more related to the male psyche. While women did write on the bathroom walls, the majority of the graffiti was still predominantly a male tradition. The study showed, however, that while men wrote about the sexuality of women, while women tended to write mainly about the political spectrum of feminism as opposed to writing about the opposite sex. In the film, Style Wars, the youth of graffiti were portrayed in a both positive and negative light. While some people were impressed with the looks of the graffiti, many were still hesitant about the new art wave that was seeping through New York City at the time. In one interview, a man appreciated the graffiti but was visibly disturbed when the camera crew suggested that it was taking place in his neighborhood. On our own campus at JMU, the Breeze cited the graffiti on campus as an outlet for boredom and frustration. While this seems a positive notion in association with graffiti, they also cited that they had to spend about $1,000 a year on cleaning the desks, hallways, and the sides of the dorm buildings. It had gotten to the point that by February 1st, 1986, they had included the cleaning of graffiti around campus as part of the housekeeping bill that they charged. While students liked reading what had been written, the message was still about fake friends and using cocaine at the local disco. However, by the end of the 1980s, the graffiti artists themselves were changing. For those who went, the first generation of graffiti artists began to return from college and began to relive their youth by creating more pieces of graffiti with their newfound art skills. It has also been noted the second generation of graffiti writers, who were more likely to attend college, began to express their ideas in the form of graffiti. Graffiti, though, was still being used as a criminal act in many parts of the country. On October 11, 1989, two 19-year-olds sprayed anti-Semitic graffiti throughout a Boston suburb on the eve of Yom Kippur. They spray-painted streets, homes, mailboxes, and cars during their spree. The courts quickly charged them with 27 counts of vandalism. Even though the graffiti had begun to change with the artists, and even its status as an underground movement, the public was still reacting negatively toward this new form of art as it entered the 1990s. While graffiti had changed during the 1980s into a visible and visually entertaining medium amongst artists, the general public was still largely against the movement. Some of that perception was about to change, however. In February of 1991, artists Dan One and Quisp displayed their art in the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. While the mayor was opposed to the idea of having graffiti in his city and even made January an anti-graffiti month, the artists proceeded with their work. It was considered a success, and the art director of the museum even cited the graffiti as a valid art form. Many authorities of universities were still viewing graffiti as an inherent evil and a youthful expression. However, some were beginning to view it as something more. Professors at the University of Benin in Nigeria started to see graffiti as an expression still, but one the minorities used so that their voice could be heard. They used a variety of strategies to show their oppression within the system, as they unfortunately correctly rationalized that they wouldn't have been heard otherwise. At our own university, graffiti was still viewed as a negative force in the community. In 1995, a house on South High Street was severely vandalized on the bottom floor. One of the complaints after the incident was the massive amount of graffiti all over the walls and refrigerator in particular. The article seems to skim over some of the damage incurred by the vandals and focuses on the graffiti of the house instead. It appears as though this was the main concern of the tenant rather than destruction to the other parts of their house. In 1990, though, a year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Edwina Sandys erected a sculpture called Breakthrough. The piece showcased a section of the Berlin Wall that had been knocked down and placed on the campus of Westminster College. The piece took the oppression and graffiti of the times into a symbol for the effort of humanity to break down the walls of communism and oppression. On January 6, 1990, two artists, Slick and Hex, faced off for the title of the Graffiti King of Los Angeles. While this may seem ominous, it was just to show who had been more creative and artistic with their work. They were even given permission to paint a store owner's back wall to prevent just plain taggers from spray painting. Both had been praised by Pasadena College of Art and Design for this, and Slick had even studied illustration in college. Though many events were occurring to show a change in the perception of graffiti, there were still many people who viewed the new art form as a sign of the broken times that they were living in. They still associated it with gangs, violence, and the general problems that were plaguing society at the time. As an even further example of how graffiti was still stuck with its association with gangs and particularly violence, on December 9, 1990, graffiti was used in a rape case. On the second floor of Rockefeller Library at Brown University, a woman scrawled on a restroom door that someone had raped her. Over time, many women also began adding their names and complaints against the university for doing nothing about what was going on. On March 1, 1997, Tom Black wrote a lengthy article on the decay that he classified as graffiti art around the nation. He blamed the destruction of neighborhoods, the horrified residents who now wanted to move because of it, and the lost revenue from covering up the tags and murals left by the artists. The 1990s saw the emergence of graffiti as an art form and as a way for minorities to speak out in a setting where they wouldn't be ignored. It seemed that people were starting to understand that graffiti was more than the gangs and vandalism that it appeared to be. Unfortunately, many seem to still associate graffiti with all of its bad attributes that they had in the previous decade. Now, at least 30 years after graffiti first started to appear in cities, it seems two sides have emerged in the perception of graffiti. The first side seems to still see graffiti as an evil placed upon society and represents all the bad associated with our modern times. The other side to this is that there are people who view graffiti as another type of art form that exists to beautify our cities or have people question their own morals or lifestyles. At Connecticut College in 2015, classes were shut down for a period of time due to racist graffiti. It apparently brought up several issues that had been a problem in the past history of the school. While apparently small in scale, the graffiti sparked a major debate and several hostilities on campus. On April 4, 2016, there were several references to Donald Trump around the Pitzer College campus. Again, the graffiti brought up several issues of race around the campus, as the graffiti had been written over a Pitzer piece of artwork. Many students were outraged due to the meaning behind Trump's slogan and his recent policies, and lashed out against his slogan. Though there has been hate throughout much of graffiti's sordid history, recently some movements have begun to use graffiti as a message or piece of artwork. Hibbing Community College has been recently displaying a variety of pieces of what they call artwork that has come in the form of graffiti to promote an awareness of suicide. The pieces include pets and a variety of humans to showcase the theme that with suicide, many people or animals are affected instead of just the one. In Cork City, some artists have now begun to beautify the area through carefully laid out plans of graffiti. This culminated in 4 pieces of artwork designed to beautify the city and teach the students about urban art. While some residents of the city have not liked the idea, many feel it adds something to an otherwise boring side of a building. The professor came up with the idea in conjunction with Crawford's College of Art and Design and the Creativity and Change program to help his students with the practical application and study of the skills that they have learned in class. Graffiti has changed its role to such a degree in some minds that many now buy clothing from a store that promotes the graphic design of graffiti. It is not considered a defacement of the clothing, but now as a piece of fashion. I believe that the public perception of graffiti has changed. Though several people may still associate it with vandalism, hate, and violence, it has evolved over the past decades into an outlet for both activists and artists alike. I believe, from what I have seen in my research, is that it is more of the message behind the graffiti rather than just the graffiti itself. I also believe that graffiti will continue to evolve into more of an art form in the greater art community and become more associated with what is now called urban art.
Crime scene colon, these cold streets you patrol on. Try to get a hold on, kids strapped with crowd on. Yeah, it was me and Sua, right? On a Tuesday night, had green, brown, black, 2 blue shades and white. Cosmic stayed home, but Biff Crew stayed tight. Staking out the steel dragon for a true spray fight. In other words, a back jump.